right, everybody. Well, welcome this morning to the July 1st edition of the DAACAT. You just have myself and Jim McDermott today, so we'll go ahead and kind of get started with the agenda. Obviously, we'll start off with a trivia question. We're going to have a lot of the discussion today around disease risk, fungicide timing. We're right on the cusp of tassels coming out. Hit a little bit on soybean spraying. We've had a lot of area get some rain, but we do have a few pockets that are still hoping to catch one of these rains this week, and we have a lot of chances. A little bit of wind damage from the storms, the last couple days too, and then the product spotlight. So that's kind of what the agenda for this morning will be. So we will start off with our trivia question and kind of timely for the season. Which fungicide mode of action has curative properties?
That's a good one, Dustin. Especially DeLauro Complete has 3 modes of action and only one is curative.
Well, there we go. Cody. Yes. Group 3 DMIs or triazoles. So DeLauro Complete, like Jim mentioned, is 3 mode of action. You have triazole, you have the SDHI, and you have the strobe. But our triazole and DeLauro Complete would be the prothioconazole. So good to have a new winner.
Nice job, Cody. Yeah, that's always good to see. Especially naming the class, the group.
That is even better. That's maybe a little bit of extra credit.
Yeah.
You want to go ahead and take this, Jim, with GDUs?
Yep. Sure will. Just getting more people admitted to the party.
Yep, I'll go.
Welcome, everyone. So yeah, I always want to do the GDU accumulation checkup. Picked Emmetsburg as the spot for this morning. So, starting to get interesting now that we're just approaching tasseling. So from those earlier planting dates using the 11th, still running ahead of schedule. And in fact, from that 11th of April planting date, that's when we're the most ahead of schedule, 127 GDUs ahead. And for using a 103-day hybrid, that is putting tasseling here just around the corner on the 250th celebration day. And looking forward going to the 22nd, still running ahead on GDUs and pushing tasseling to the 8th. And then on the 5th of May planting, also running ahead on GDUs about 80. And then that puts tasseling at right around the 13th. So still running ahead. Of course, some of these days where we've had nighttime lows in the low 70s, 72, 73, we're accumulating 28, 29 GDUs in a day. So if you go down to the bottom, you can see right now it takes 50 GDUs per leaf. So easily 2 days right now, we're putting on a new leaf. So things are changing rapidly, which is good to see. And then just a check in on the soil GDUs, not as important as it was a few weeks ago, but it actually has slowed down a little bit, especially with the cool weather we had last week, but still running ahead of last year. From the LA Research Farm, we're at 1287. So obviously well past the point where a lot of our rootworm larvae have hatched out. And we have seen larvae in the field. So no question about that. You still want to be digging, still want to be looking because those larvae will be out there. I've seen some as large as 3rd instar, and I'm sure there's larger ones out there than that. So prime time to be looking at rootworm.
And here's kind of a map that shows kind of crop conditions for this year. And as you look at, Iowa, good to excellent ratings right now, 78%, 77 last week, and compared to last year, 85%. But really, I take that into context. You think, we're a little bit behind last year. But I think some of, southern Iowa and probably southeast Iowa is probably dragging down some of that good to excellent ratings, because as I drive across northwest Iowa, it is really hard to find a poor looking cornfield. Yeah, there's pockets here and there, but man, as you drive around, it really looks good. And just wanted to hit on that. Obviously commodity prices are a little depressed. There's not much we can do about that, but right now we have a fantastic looking corn crop, and we're in kind of that environment where we're going to have to bushel our way out of it. Our or we can't do anything about the corn price, but we can really help influence yield potential at the end of the year. And right now we are set up pretty well across Northwest Iowa.
Yeah, I would agree, Dustin. And just to add to that, you look at Illinois, Missouri, Nebraska, Kansas, especially Illinois, a lot of acres there. And not that you want to wish ill on anyone, but if we've got the good, excellent, high rating, if we can protect our crop, may be a valuable commodity if some of these other areas are not looking as good.
Yeah, and then here's kind of the beans as well. So as we look at good, excellent ratings this last week, 75, a little bit up from last week, about a little just behind from a year ago at this time. But, beans were really looking good in the last 2 weeks with those cooler temperatures. They kind of stalled out, but just driving around Monday morning over the weekend, it just looks like they woke up again and really are starting to take off.
Yeah, depending on what type of herbicide they're trying to recover from.
That is true. We do have some sitting in that stalled out phase, but hopefully with the rain and the heat, they kick it into gear. Now trying to switch gears here. So obviously we got a really good looking crop. Let's look at kind of the disease risk we have out here right now. These are the risk forecast tools. So looking at from June to July 19th, taking into a weather account. And this would be the northern corn leaf blight risks. And you can see we're just kind of in that moderate area all across Iowa for northern corn leaf blight. But as we think of some of the other ones that have gotten kind of the more of the headlines, I guess, as we look at tar spot risk, obviously getting a little bit more in the moderate range, especially in eastern Iowa, where they've battled it over the last few years, and then into southern Iowa on tar spot. This is the forecasted risk.
And then as of this morning, this is where the positive IDs have been for tar spot. A few more counties continue to get added in Iowa. Nebraska, you've got, good share of the eastern third covered. And of course, like we've mentioned in the past, there is a function of how new the disease is. Most areas in Iowa, of course, have seen tar spot, and they're probably not going to turn it in on a sample. And right now, if we are looking for tar spot, middle of the canopy, especially where you've got the horizontal leaves, that's more of a prime spot, just simply because that's going to be your areas where you're going to have more leaf wetness. As you get into the upper part of the canopy with your upright leaves, it's just going to drain off a little quicker. So if you're looking for tar spot, middle of the canopy, especially on some of our bigger corn, is where I would expect to find it first.
As we'll keep chugging through some of the different risks, I was curious if anybody wants to put in the chat. We've all been walking cornfields probably the last week, 10 days. Just curious if anybody's seeing anything for disease out there. The only thing, gotten a little eye spot is about the only thing that I've come across, but curious if anybody else has seen anything. Go ahead and put it in the chat. Then as we look at common rust, obviously, this one's, yes, it's a corn disease. Is it really yield impacting? Probably not too much over the years, but this is, as you look at this map, this is the one that kind of lights up a little bit more for higher risk, is for common rust. But obviously the big rust one that everybody's worried about and we're really trying to keep an eye on is southern rust. So this was the map that was sent out on Monday of the new disease risk. So obviously we're still in the low to very low. And then as we look at, so this is the map that just came out this week. And then this is what it looked like a year ago. This was the risk map for 2025. So if you didn't look too closely, it almost looks the exact same as we were a year ago with the risk of southern rust.
Just as a side note, appreciate the comments in the chat. Larry Sink adding that fluopyram technically could be in that preventative category, although triazoles I would maintain is still going to be your main line of defense there on the curative side. And as far as diseases that people are seeing, bacterial leaf streak, Holcus spot, Dustin, those are a couple that I've seen myself. I haven't spent days and days looking for tar spot, but the bacterial leaf streak and Holcus spot, are the ones that only diseases that I've seen on corn as of right now. And a few others out there, Physoderma brown spot, as we have some of these whirls that stay wet or continuous wetness, again, that's Physoderma brown spot's going to be another one that'll pop up.
As we look at, here's the risk map. So we're really trying to keep an eye on this because the nice thing, obviously, southern rust doesn't overwinter. It's going to have to be blown in so we can watch it progress from the south. So these are the disease risk maps for the Delta and Texas, obviously showing high levels of risk going forward over the next 2 weeks for southern rust, in the southern states. But then here again is kind of that disease risk, which has been identified. So the one on the left over here is from last year. And again, kind of like Jim said, this all takes into account people actually going on the site and, identifying that it has been found in these counties. So this was in 2025. Obviously, we had some in Illinois County and Texas. And then here is from yesterday, the positive ID of rust. So really the only positive ID of rust that we've seen this year, or at least it's been put on the website, is a few counties in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And then what really all comes into equation of if we're going to get southern rust. So obviously corn planted in the southern United States it's an outbreak, and then we get southerly winds. So I really wanted to look at the last year's May and June patterns of wind coming out of the south. So I have these highlighted of winds out of the south greater than 20 miles an hour for the month of May. So this would be 2025. As you can see, we had 6 days in the month of May that we had greater than 20 mile an hour winds out of the south. This would be a May of 2026. Yes, like 5, 7, 10, 12 days actually we had of southerly winds out of the south last month. So considerably windier May than we'd had a year ago. But obviously, if you're going to have southerly winds, there hasn't been much of an outbreak, and that'd be earlier in the season to move spores up as well. So probably not all that concerning having a windier May. June's probably more indicative if we're going to have a problem. So as we look at June 2025, had a lot of days of southerly winds, and especially as you look at that last half of May. And then there's the stretch in here where we just seen really strong southerly winds greater than 30 miles an hour, on that last half of June. And then you compare that to this year, kind of similar number of days. We're kind of front loaded, but especially this last half, we have not seen as drastic of winds coming out of the south as we did a year ago. So just wanted it's interesting information. Obviously, we'll just keep tracking this and see if there's a progression. But, last year we had a perfect storm, those late June winds, a lot of rust outbreak in the south, and then you throw on top of it the wettest July on record, set up for a perfect storm. So yet to be determined what disease is the major culprit of 2026, but probably rainfall is going to play a big impact of that in temperature over the next few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you want to add there, Jim?
No, just maybe we can go on to the next one and try to get at the another big question, because the winds, inoculum, how many acres? Obviously the last couple of years, especially last year, the increase in acres in the south contributed to our disease outbreak. So as of yesterday, this is the USDA acreage report, and it is showing less acres percentage wise in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, relatively small acres anyway, but some pretty drastic reductions there. Arkansas, Kansas actually are a little bit higher. But overall, especially that Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi area, that Gulf Coast area, there are a few less acres of corn. So will that be a factor? The question has come up a number of times, but it did specifically come up 4 weeks ago on a DAACAT. And, now we do have the answer of what at least the USDA report is as of right now.
And I'd like to throw this in as well. This was put out by Eric Snodgrass, and he's been tracking cumulative leaf wetness hours for, and comparing this year to the last 20 years. And just this year, it is showing much above average leaf wetness. So obviously, as you're thinking about tar spot or southern rust, you're going to need prolonged leaf wetness. So just another thing we're trying to track. Obviously, we learned a lot last year and just trying to get as much information out there and track the progression of these diseases as we go into the growing season.
Mm-hmm.
So we hit a little bit on the disease risk maps, obviously pretty clean in Northwest Iowa, but the biggest thing right now is just protecting the yield potential we have out there. It looks great. So we wanted to hit a little bit on DeLauro Complete and timing. So these pictures are out of our Sac City Research Farm last year. And looking at different rates of DeLauro Complete and timing. And so on the left-hand side, this would be pictures taken 32 days after application, right-hand side, 52 days after application. And this would be at the 8-ounce rate and then the yield advantage. And really, I just want you to kind of calibrate your eyes to the plant health in the canopy here on to the right as we increase these rates. So that's at 8 ounces, and we're really trying to promote moving these rates up. We've done a good job over the years talking about herbicides and increasing rates and prolonging that residual with pre's and for herbicides, and it's the similar conversation as we're thinking about fungicides. Let's increase these rates, prolong the residual. And there's probably not a huge appetite, and I hope we don't have to either spray multiple applications, have to come back a second time. And increasing these rates will put us in a better position, maybe not to have to come back. So as we look at move up, so here's the 10-ounce rate. Obviously, you get a little bit of bump in yield, but much healthier upper portion of the canopy as we move that DeLauro Complete rate up to 10 ounces. And then once again, we hit it up to 12 ounces at R1. And again, showing a nice yield increase. We've had several of these trials that we've seen kind of these 5 bushel increments as we move up rates from 8 to 10 to 12, and definitely better late season plant health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, you look at this last year's information, and obviously a fairly heavy disease year. The stay green, the plant health is dramatic, especially if we had included the untreated, then you'd see a really dramatic difference. And we've talked about this before, but a lot of times these strip trials don't tell the full story. When you have diseases like tar spot, southern rust, in a whole field scenario, with their ability to reproduce spores rapidly, it's going to spread very quickly versus some of these strips. So I think it's pretty conservative, these yield advantages that we tend to see in these narrower strips versus whole field situations where we were seeing the 40, 50 bushel advantages.
The one thing I want to call out here, so here's the 8-ounce rate at R3. And, I want to hit a little bit on timing, especially last year with the late onset of southern rust. Then tar spot over the last couple of years has moved in late. Don't think it's been real yield impacting for us. But obviously we have the inoculum out there. And I think of last year, and there was a lot of talk of holding these applications off to R3. And this is kind of indicative. I mean, you would have thought if any year holding off those applications last year should have been the best. But I guess everybody has an opinion on this. But over the years on my recommendations for fungicide applications, I like to be pretty proactive and get after it pretty early. As soon as I see some tassels, you have to watch yourself. Obviously, years back, fungicides got a dirty rap for causing arrested ear. But if you watch what surfactants you have in there and you have, NPE-free surfactants, I like to be on the front side because it just seems like, obviously, we spray a lot of fungicide across Northwest Iowa. There's a limited amount of planes and drones. It seems like, yeah. So just wanted to hit that kind of on the timing frame. I always like to be on the early side. You got all the leaves out there. You're going to protect all of the exposed leaves. I like to be on the early side just because there's a limited amount of planes and ground rigs and drones in Northwest Iowa. And I like to be on the front side than pushing it closer to brown silt.
Yep, I sure agree. And you look, we've talked about the risk, and frankly, we really can't predict even now, with all the things we've talked about, exactly what we're going to have. But you look at the fact that we are fairly early on the tassel, we've got a heck of a crop coming. Those two factors alone, to me, are really positive for having the ROI increased in a year like this. Anytime we have high yield environments, that's generally going to increase our opportunity to see more bushels on a fungicide response. And also, when we do have a high yield potential, we've got that big ear out there. That is a big sink. In other words, we've got to continue to fill that ear throughout the rest of the season. We don't know what kind of stress we're going to have, but it does put more pressure on that stalk as far as late season standability. So it's really another reason to protect that yield, but also protect that standability late season when we've got that larger ear to fill. So just to sum it up, that's really kind of where we're at. I think overall, when you talk about the one pass versus two pass, I think most areas, Northwest Iowa, I think you're going to see a little more consistent response and a consistent ROI with using that one pass with the higher rates, for sure 10, if not 12, helping us out on that residual, again, with some of the earlier tasseling that we have this year. And knowing that, tar spot, southern rust can continue to infect that corn plant later into August, even into September, as we've seen the last couple of years. And as we're doing, just the last thing on the two pass, if we are looking at two pass, then we really kind of have to make that decision early, saying, okay, we're just going to go that lower rate first, and then come back with say a straight Delaro at 8 ounces 21 days later. So if someone does want to do that two pass, that's really where our recommendations would be. To give a little love to soybeans, haven't talked much about them, have we?
Yep.
So, growth stages, I guess the question is, does it matter at this point of the year? Well, there's two main things going on with soybeans, continuing to kill weeds or recovery from herbicide spray, or our fungicide sprays with Delaro Complete as well. Just by definition, the full bloom, is when we've got the flowers at one of the top two nodes, and beginning pod, which starting to see a little bit of that, is when we've got a pod 3/16 long at one of those upper four nodes. And the upper four nodes are defined by where we've got that fully developed leaf. You can see where that box is on number 1. It looks like there's a node above that, but those leaves are not completely open, so that's officially not counted as a node. And go ahead to the next one, but does it matter? Well, yeah, if we've got a lot of herbicides, of course, that are off label at this point. But as we get into R3, which this is a picture I took yesterday. This was a field that was planted the 9th of April. This would be in O'Brien County, 1.6 maturity. You do have pod formation there, very small, but you do have pod formation that's more than 3/16 of an inch. And then down in the lower part of the canopy, you've got a good inch, if not a little, almost inch and a half pod. So you are moving into R3. So at R3, the risk for any of these herbicides go up, in my mind, pretty dramatically as far as risking yield loss. We're really starting to affect yield. And of course, as we get into our fungicide timing on soybeans, R3 is generally considered the ideal time. I will say with soybeans, there's a little more flexibility. I think we can still see some pretty good yield response, even if we're into R4. Obviously, if we're managing white mold, we want to be that R1 followed by R3 or even R4. So if we're in the white mold management, hopefully we're more on the second application now versus the first. But some of these beans, again, this is an earlier planted bean, early maturity, but we're rapidly moving to that R3. So we have to be aware of that for our herbicides as well as fungicide spraying.
The one thing I want to call out too, I thought we're done spraying corn, but I've gotten several calls of finding some weed escapes and wanting to make rescue applications. And even with drop nozzles, if you look across the spectrum of options, it's like 36-inch cutoffs, even with drop nozzles. So I would just recommend that we just stay out of cornfields. If guys really have to do something, spray some 2,4-D at brown silk, but let's just stay out of cornfields post spraying. So I've gotten several calls the last couple days, and it just
Yeah, good idea. Yeah, and like we mentioned, certainly areas that miss these rains, and we're heading into that critical time. We've been under stress. There's been a fair amount of areas throughout the month of June that have had rolled corn. I don't get too concerned about that, but as we get to the 10 days before we move into the reproductive stage, yeah, we can start to see some yield loss. These figures, and we had put them in the newsletter as well. These are under extreme scenarios, losing 4% yield loss per day. You hate to think about that too long, but those would be in the cases where that corn plant is even continuing to stay rolled in the evening hours. So pretty extreme. But obviously, as we move into the tassel R1 stages, we're using almost 1/3 of an inch of water a day, and our yield loss numbers go up drastically. So hopefully, these areas that got rain could have been more timely to set it up in front of the heat, as well as setting it up in front of the reproductive stages. And then, of course, with rain also comes the negative part too. There's been some lodging out there. There's has been some green snap. I guess from what I've seen the last couple days, the green snap is fairly limited. More fields similar to this, where you've got that corn that's pretty well blown over. At least at this stage, especially before tasseling, we've got a pretty good opportunity to straighten that back up. We've got more brace roots to come out. We've got a chance to really get those brace roots from the top, or the 3 or 4 nodes above the soil line. But as we've seen in past years, that gooseneck usually will remain the rest of the season, and sometimes that can affect the corn's ability to take in moisture and nutrients, just handle stress. Last year we did see some of that, where the root mass physically was pulled out of the soil, and those plants were never quite the same. At this stage, we're a little bit earlier than what we were last year for some of that wide scale root lodging. So hopefully we'll have a chance to recover. In fact, I believe it was 3 years ago, there was some wide scale winds on the 5th of July, and our corn wasn't as far along that year. And we had excellent recovery from those winds. So hoping the same thing this year, especially with a little bit of moisture in the ground, and that ground is fairly soft. So that'll help those new brace roots get established.
Yeah, and you never want to see corn blow down, but better now than 2 weeks from now, and everything's trying to start to tassel. So,
yes, absolutely.
To hit on kind of spotlight product for the week until we wrap it up. So this is 11387, brand new 113-day Tricepta, and really, as I look at this product, great addition to the lineup. Consistent product, kind of broad acre play, fence row to fence row, agronomist type corn. There's not much you can do wrong with it. Checks all the boxes as you look at the agronomic ratings and the disease ratings throughout. But it also has, the roots and stalks to be able, if you got a guy that wants to push it for higher yield, it can do that as well. So it's kind of a broad acre, but if you want to manage it for higher yields, that's definitely it. But the one call out, it is 113-day. We keep pushing relative maturities higher and higher with that late season plant health and stay green. It does have a longer husk. It's going to hold a little bit more moisture. So it is a full 113, but a great addition to the lineup to fit a lot of acres.
Yeah, exciting to have products like this with that kind of plant health, that kind of stay green, and disease tolerance, boy, as good as anything out there.
And final slide, I guess. I appreciate everybody hopping on today, the engagement. Here is your CCA credits if you want to scan the QR code. Obviously, we'll stay on. If you want to put any questions in the chat or come off mute, we can have a discussion. But appreciate the attendance, and everybody have a happy 4th and try to stay cool the next few days.
That is great advice, Dustin. With emphasis on the try.
Yep. everybody come back from the weekend with all their appendages.
That is sound advice also. Yep. Thanks everyone for being on.